This video is brought to you by Amber. Amber keeps your EV on the road longer, offering seamless protection with no long-term contracts or upfront costs. Learn more at the link in the description and use code SPEC5 for 5% off. Howdy folks, welcome back to another Out of Spec Renew video. Today we're working on this 2019 Tesla Model S performance dual motor. So it's actually a Raven powertrain car. This car was actually mostly brought in for a rotor coolant delete, which I've actually already done on it. But the other thing that I wanted to show here is we're going to change the oil in both gearboxes, front and rear. So yeah, we're going to go through that whole process and I'll show you how it's done. Alright, so first things first, I've got the car up on the lift here. We're going to get it up in the air. We're actually going to do the rear drive unit first, which is going to be the easy one. Because this is a Raven powertrain, it's got the permanent magnet motor in the front, which is more or less very similar to the rear motor on a Model 3. And in order to fill that one, we actually have to run the oil pump while filling it. There's another sort of a weird thing with this, is it actually uses two different types of gearbox fluid for the front and the rear. There is a newer version of the gearbox fluid called KAF1. I believe that literally stands for Kick-Ass Fluid 1, technical term. But yeah, the older spec uses two different fluids for front and rear. You can't get the new KAF1 fluid through Tesla, and apparently none of the vendors have it available. So it's kind of a weird thing. So you got to use the old spec fluid for the front and the rear. The front is going to be using EDF2 fluid, and then the rear, the official spec is SK212B, which is essentially the same thing as Dexron 6 automatic transmission fluid. So we'll use some Dexron 6 in the rear and our EDF2 in the front, and we'll go ahead and just basically do a drain and refill here. Before I lift the car up, we're going to go ahead and disassemble our frunk. We do have to take all of this apart in order to get to the front drive unit, so we might as well do that while we have the car down here at the ground. So we'll take our main panel off here, and then yeah, we've just got our side panels, all of our ducting and stuff, and the front tub itself, and we should have access to the front drive unit at that point. Alright, our front drive unit is now exposed right down there, but like I said, we're going to go ahead and do the rear drive unit first, and we'll save this for the end. So now we've got to go ahead and bring the car up, and yeah, we'll go ahead and start on the process. Alright, so we've got the car up in the air. I've already got the bottom cover off here, and we're going to do the oil change in the rear drive unit first. Now this process pretty much is exactly the same whether it's a large drive unit or a small drive unit for both Model S and Model X. And it's pretty much just a simple drain and refill. So first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and pull out the fill plug so that our oil can drain out nice and easily without getting, you know, sort of trapped air in there. The car's actually still powered on, so you can hear the contactors closing there. And then we'll go ahead and pull out our drain plug. Can I do it without getting oil on my hands? Boom, mission success. So the rear drive unit here holds 1.4 liters of fluid, which, what is that, about 1.6 quarts, give or take? I don't remember for sure the conversion off the top of my head, but somewhere in that neighborhood. So I'll just go ahead and let that drain here for a minute. And then after that, we can go ahead and put the drain plug back in and refill the gearbox. There's just a little bit of metal on the drain plug there. It's magnetic. It's actually not too bad considering this drive unit has over 100,000 miles on it, because it is indeed the original drive unit. Normally, on this, since I did have this motor out to do the rotor coolant delete, typically I would actually change the oil while it's out of the car. Just makes it easier to fill it, because you don't have to pump the fluid in. But of course I wanted to get it on camera here to show you guys exactly how the process works if you were to do it in the car. So we'll just clean our drain plug off. And our fill plug here. And that is pretty much done draining, so we'll go ahead and get our drain plug back in there. Just get that snugged up like so. And then we'll just clean that up a little bit. Sweet. All right. I'll go ahead and get my fluid and my transfer pump, and we'll go ahead and fill this thing. All right, so I'm all pre-staged here. I've got my fluid pre-measured into this container, and then I've just got a little hand fluid transfer pump. I've actually clamped the hose onto the container there so that it doesn't move around. We're just going to put our output side right into the fill plug there, and then we'll just pump all the fluid in. It's as simple as that. Not too difficult. Okay, so we lost the audio for this clip, so you're going to get me as a voiceover here. But here I'm getting ready to remove the oil pump from the car. So because this is a Raven powertrain Model S, it's basically got more or less the same drive unit that would be in the rear of a Model 3. It has an electric oil pump. So there I'm just unplugging it. Just has a little tab that you pull out and press on. And that's pretty simple. Then to pull it out, I've got an e-torque socket on a ratchet there. I believe it's an E12 if I remember off the top of my head, and there's just 2 bolts that hold it in there. So I just broke those loose. I'll go ahead and loosen them off the rest of the way by hand. There's both fasteners out. So now all that's left to do is to actually pull the pump out of there, which it's fairly stuck in there. There's a pretty decent amount of friction on the O-ring, so I'm just going to grab a pry bar and gently pry the oil pump out of there. There's a little tab that sticks out. Just want to be careful because the housing is plastic, so you don't want to break it. So I'm just kind of gently pushing on it there with the pry bar until it kind of pops loose. And there we've got the oil coming out. And the reason we're removing the oil pump here is because there is no drain plug on the gearbox for these motors. So to drain the oil, you actually have to pull the oil pump out of it. So that's what we're doing here. Just pulling that oil pump out, draining the oil out of the gearbox, and that's pretty much it. Once it all drains, we'll be able to go ahead and start working on getting that thing back in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just clean the oil pump off with a clean towel here, inspect the O-rings, make sure none of them are pinched or anything, and then we should be ready to have that go back in once all the oil is finished draining out. There you can actually see the little gears in the oil pump. Now comes the fun part, which is filling it. So on these, the oil capacity includes all of the cavities that are filled when the pump is running, and you can't actually put all of the oil in without the pump running. So what we'll do is we'll start by just putting a little bit of fluid in so we don't run the pump while it's dry, and then we'll put the rest of the fluid in with the pump running. So we'll go through the process of doing that. All right, you'll have to excuse the kind of crappy camera angle here because there's just not really any space to work. But right up there, that gold plug that I have the ratchet on is the fill plug for the front gearbox here. It's a little bit of a pain to get a tool on there because there's a coolant hose and stuff in the way. But I've got that broken loose. And I'll go ahead and just pull that plug out. Maybe. Can't get a grip on it. Shouldn't have been so eager to pull the tool out of there, I guess. Yeah, it's not in a very convenient spot. There we go. Yep. It's still tight enough that I have to use the ratchet on it. Hand's starting to cramp up. Looks like the O-ring has kind of gotten stuck on the threads there, maybe. That's part of our problem. There we go. Yep, O-ring got stuck on the threads. Looks like it's still in good shape though. Alright, so that's our fill plug out. I'll go ahead and get our fluid set up and we can start filling that. Alright, so we're basically going to do the same thing again here that we did on the rear, except with our extra step being that we're going to have to run the pump in order to get all the fluid in. If you don't have the pump running, you can't get all of the fluid in here. It'll just run out of the fill plug. So you have to have the pump running in order to get all of the fluid in. On the front here, for the Raven powertrain, it's 1.8 liters. Before I turn the pump on though, we don't want it to run dry. That would be bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump a little bit of fluid in here. We'll go for maybe, I don't know, probably at least a half a liter, maybe even a full liter. So I'll do a couple pumps here. We'll get some fluid in there. That's probably good for now. And now we'll go ahead and power up our pump, and I'll show you guys how to do that. Alright, so to power up our pump, normally I would have a connector that's just the same. I would just have a pigtail that's the same connector as the original. I can't find mine, don't know what happened to it. I ordered new parts to build another one. But we can get around that. But basically what we need to know is where our power and ground is. So power is going to be pin 1, which is on the top side. Ground is pin 3, which is the bottom. Easy way you can tell though is just look at the connector. Your power will be black, ground will be, power will be red, ground will be black. So power is top, ground is bottom. There's a pin in the middle which controls the speed of the pump as far as the car is concerned. But if we just power up the two, the power and the ground, the pump will just default to running at full speed. This is actually literally just the way that Tesla has you do it in the manuals. They just have you power up the pump with the connector, with like a, they have like a official jumper box tool thing. But I'm just going to use these little jumper wires and put them directly onto the pins. And I want to make sure to bypass that middle pin. I don't want my connectors touching that. I don't know that it would really hurt it, but we don't want to short something out in there. Let me just shine my light, make sure we're good. Yep, we're good. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take a Milwaukee battery, which I might have to zip tie in here or something because I made my wires a little bit short here. But basically I'm just going to take the Milwaukee battery and I'm just going to power this pump up just with 12 volts. This is just an M12 Milwaukee. You could do it with a 12 volt power supply or whatever else. Let me see if I can figure out a way to get this to fit in here. I might just have to zip tie it to that cross member temporarily. There we go. That ought to do it. And our negative is going to be on the bottom. Positive is going to be on the top. Am I reading that right? Yep, I am. So as soon as I connect this, there you go, the pump starts to run. So we'll go ahead and pump the rest of our fluid in there. We don't want the pump to run dry, so I want to keep the fluid going. And I just want to keep filling until we get all of our fluid in there. Okay, so all of our fluid is in. I'll take my, there went my bucket. I'll just take my little fluid transfer pump out of there. And I want to put the fill plug in while the pump is still running, because like I said, the fluid will just run right out of the fill plug if the pump's not running. All right, there we go. All done. So I should be able to disconnect our battery here. We'll take our thing off of there. And I'll have to cut my zip tie off there. There we go. And I can go ahead and take our connector for the pump and make sure to plug that back in now. Just like so. And then all that's left is to put the skid plate and all that stuff back on. And then we're all good to go. That's pretty much it. Alrighty folks, well that's it for this one. Fairly short, straightforward job to do the gearbox oil change on one of these. Obviously, for the Raven version, having to power up the pump for the front one is a little bit tricky, but it's not that difficult. But a lot of people seem to get this impression that EVs are totally maintenance-free, and that's really just not the case. In all seriousness, you should be considering doing regular maintenance stuff for your electric vehicle. One of which is changing the oil in the gearboxes, which is important for a few different reasons, and more so for some cars than others. On something like this, it actually has two totally separate systems with the way that the gearboxes are front and rear. The rear one on the large drive unit, of course, is the oil in there is just for the gears. It's purely just lubrication for the gears themselves, and that's pretty much it. Is it as important to change that one more often? Maybe less so, because you don't have the potential to cause isolation faults or that kind of thing from any kind of metal particulate matter. But the large drive unit is pretty well known for getting bearing noise issues in the gearbox, so that kind of heightens the importance a little bit. On the front drive unit, either for the Raven or even the pre-Raven versions, the gearbox fluid is not only doing the lubrication for the gears, but it's also doing the cooling for the motor. So you have sort of a multi-component thing going on there, where not only is the oil doing the lubrication for the gears, but because it's cooling the windings with direct contact, it needs to have really high resistance to any kind of electrical current. So you can't have conductive cooling medium that's going right through your windings. So that's another factor to consider. Is over time, all the gears and stuff wear. You get metal particulate in the oil, and you want to flush that out from time to time. Obviously, there's a filter in there to catch any metal particulate, but it's only going to catch so much of it. And all of the additives in the oils that help with wear properties and stuff break down over time. It used to be that Tesla actually even had a service interval for changing the gearbox oil on these cars, and they actually removed it. Is that because they deemed that they didn't need gearbox oil changes? Maybe so. But I'm a little bit more inclined to think it's because they didn't want people bringing cars in all the time for gearbox oil changes and clogging up the service centers. And then there's other drive units out there from other manufacturers that it's super important to do this on too. One that comes to mind very prominently for me is the gearboxes in the Hyundai Kona, Kia Niro, and the original Hyundai Ioniq. Not the new Ioniq 5 or anything, but the old style, like that I did a motor rebuild on here, I don't know, a couple months ago, I guess. On those, it's super common for the gearbox to develop noise issues from the bearings. And part of the big reason for that is that the magnet in there that's supposed to pick up metal particulate doesn't do a very good job, and you end up with a lot of metal particulate in the oil, and it causes some pretty extreme wear issues to the bearings, and then they start to make a bunch of noise. So I would say on those, it's super important to do gearbox oil changes. I would say probably every 50,000 miles would be ideal. On something like this, you could probably do with 50,000 mile changes, but that's probably overkill. I would say 100,000 is a pretty good number to shoot for, which is about how many miles this car has on it. But anyways, enough on my rant about servicing. Yeah, hopefully this video is useful if anybody is looking to change their own gearbox oil in their electric vehicle, or just helps inform some people to know that it's not completely maintenance free. There are some things that you need to take care of. Obviously, there's other things that should be looked at from time to time. Some manufacturers recommend a coolant flush, either at a mileage or time interval. I would say it's probably mostly more down to the fact that you want to check the pH. If the pH of the coolant is fine, you really don't need to change it all that badly. And then, yeah, other stuff like brake fluid. You want to make sure your brake fluid doesn't have any moisture content in it, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it. As always, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more EV repairs in the future.